I was a musician when I was a young fellow, so I was probably 12 or 13, and I got my first guitar. My brother actually got it first, my brother Ben, who you know, and I just fell in love with it. I mean, very quickly I realized it was kind of one of the few ways I had of expressing myself that didn't get me in too much trouble at school. And so I always wanted to be a musician. I was always a musician growing up. And then as time went on, I was in a band in high school, and I had a little bit of success with them. And as time went on, I just realized, like, okay, I want to keep working in the music industry. There's no doubt about that. But as I kind of researched and learned about how the inner workings of the business ran, I found out quickly that being a musician is one of the last ways you can make money in the music industry. If you want to do, that's not necessarily the best approach. And so I kind of just started researching around. I was like, well, what else do people do in the music industry? What else can I do? Can I do A&R? Can I be a producer? And then a friend of mine who I went to high school with and played in my early band with one day said, I found out about this great program in Orlando called Full Sail. And it's a 1-year program that you go down and you get your associate's degree in recording arts, which at the time I had no idea what that even entailed. And he was like, then we can get out and we can just start mixing and we can start doing stuff. And I was like, mixing? What do you mean? I don't even know what that means. What is mixing? And he goes, oh, a friend of mine does it. You sit in a room all day and listen to music and get paid money and just like tweak it out and make it sound good. I was like, well, I'm in. Like, let me do that. Where was my high school guidance counselor with that job? That's what I'm talking about. And so I guess this was about 2004, and I was 21 or 20, and I was out of high school. I had tried 1 year at regular college, and I was miserable. I didn't like it at all. And so I ended up going to Full Sail for the 1 year with my friend, and I made it through and got back and got an internship at a studio after I realized I learned about recording and mixing and realized that mixing was definitely something I wanted to do, because I'd always had a decent ear for, how music sounded and how I thought it was supposed to sound. And so that began my career, and that was, I guess, 2005. I interned at a studio briefly. I think I was supposed to do like a 6-month internship, and it lasted about 2 weeks maybe. It was kind of classic studio tale of the engineer who was scheduled to record the session just was late and didn't show up on time, and I was there assisting. And so the clients who were there were just like, all right, man, like, we need someone to record us. And I was just like, okay, I was like some young kid, just like having no idea what I was doing. And so I got up and started recording their session and made every mistake imaginable. And fortunately, I made them laugh enough that they invited me back the next day, and I kind of learned the pacing and stuff like that. And then that was the end of my internship. That was about a 2-week internship. And then from there, I was just recording at various studios around Atlanta. And then someone one day needed a song mixed, and I told him, give me $100 for it and I'll take a stab at it. And the rest is history. And I've been mixing records for the last 6 years, pretty much ever since. What is mixing? That's the eternal question. The best way I can describe mixing is I'm sort of taking the component parts of a song. I'm taking the individual tracks that someone has recorded, and I'm trying to make the song sound as close to the way a producer and the artist envision it in their head. So I'm the one who kind of takes their rough sketching and turns it into what it's supposed to be. Like I take a song and make it ready for a CD, ready for the radio, ready for the internet. It's mostly about blending frequencies, about making sure everything that needs to be heard is being heard. With stuff like, with classical music, obviously, there's a whole different dynamic to it, because I work in mostly kind of pop and, rap and the kind of stuff you would hear normally on the radio. I've done a little bit of work with classical music, not a ton. I would love to do more, because the recording of it is such an incredible process. And one thing I love is that you don't have to do much with classical artists, because they play so dynamically and they know exactly what they're doing, and so it's usually just get the right levels and back off. I think the best way I can say it is it's trying to take a song and turn it into what it's supposed to be. The ideal version of itself, whatever that may be. It's different for every mixer. So that will change depending on the project, because the way most producers, kind of the parlance of the modern music era is that everyone wears multiple hats. And so the guy who created the beat or the instrumentation for a song might have some say on how the vocals are going to sound, and he might have some say on, my mixing, or that person may just create a beat and send it to me, and then I'll do all of that stuff. So sometimes I end up producing a lot of the music that I work on, and I'm fortunate in that I've developed a few relationships with clients over the years whereby they sort of give me their music and say, do what you want to it. Like, they trust me enough to let me kind of take the song in a direction I feel is the most appropriate. So usually with the producer, in the traditional sense of the studio hierarchy, kind of the old model is like engineers sitting behind a console tweaking knobs and the producer standing behind them, and they're pretty much guiding the session. They're the ones saying, okay, get a little bit more reverb on this snare drum, get a little bit more, presence on these vocals or whatever. And it's sort of me trying to complete their vision to a certain extent. And that's how it traditionally was. Nowadays, sometimes I'm producing, sometimes I'm just mixing, sometimes the producers across the country on Skype with me trying to figure out why something sounds, so it's a whole different dynamic. So yeah, sometimes I work kind of in service of the producer, and sometimes I'm trying to show the producer what needs to happen, and it's always kind of a give and take depending on the project I'm working on. The unfortunate reality with a lot of modern music, especially kind of the more pop and like radio-based stuff, is that the artists have less and less say in kind of what happens. I mean, oftentimes I find that I will work almost exclusively with a producer, sometimes never even meeting the artist when I'm mixing, and the producer and I will just go through and kind of make their song what we feel like it needs to be made into, and then they'll hear it at some point. We'll send them an MP3, or they'll come in and listen, and so it's kind of amazing. You would think the artist would be like sort of the arbiter of what's appropriate for their music and what isn't, but oftentimes that's not the case. With smaller projects where there's less of a budget, you'll see the artists come in and it'll just be them and me, and there won't even be a producer. And those are fun too, because it's kind of cutting out the middleman. I get a kind of direct insight into the artist's head and what they want to hear. And that helps me easily inform what I'm going to do for them. So the relationship, the artist is always they're always the ones who kind of want the most elaborate things to happen, and they don't really have a lot of idea of the technical aspect behind how that works. And so I end up trying to just kind of decipher language, like it's the artists speak their own language. I mean, I've had artists refer to sounds in colors before, and they sort of refer to them in moods, and they have all these bizarre metaphors and euphemisms for the sounds they want. Producers tend to be much more like, direct, and they know a lot about the technical stuff. So we tend to work better when we're mixing. But yeah, the artists probably have more say than they used to, but still not as much as they probably should. I have not in a long time. When I was growing up, I used to play in the band in high school, and so I have some experience reading music. And in fact, my old band instructor is easily one of the most influential people to me in informing my young musical life, even though I was a horrible student, the absolute worst. The guy hated, I think, the ground I walked on, and he was constantly trying to find ways to get me out of band. And I didn't have any interest in behaving with him either, but sort of all of the stuff he mentioned to me some of it got through my thick skull, and I was able to, the guy truly informed the way I listen to and kind of view music. I've had clients who we've worked on material, and then after the fact, they'll transcribe it into sheet music. I've been very lucky. Like, the large bulk of the work I've gotten since I started my career was word of mouth, essentially. The first studio I interned at was a place called Major League Studios, which is no longer open. Unfortunately, some of the management was involved in some shady dealings, as is often the case in the music industry, and so the studio ended up shutting down. But for the few months I was there, they basically just sent me kind of a barrage of clients. They were all kind of scouting people, and they would just send them to the studio to get recordings done. And so from there, within the first few months of my career, I had kind of a stable of artists who at least knew me, and I was still terrible, obviously, but I was training and learning and getting better. So early on, I was able to get enough people talking about my work that I was able to sustain for quite some time. I didn't really, and even to this day, still, I don't have to do a lot of promotion or whatever. There's like a mastering engineer, a guy, Glenn Schick, who does a lot of the mastering in Atlanta here, very tremendous mastering engineer, very cool guy. They heard some of my work about a year or so ago, 2 years ago, and they liked it enough that they put me on their kind of list of mixers to reference people. So whenever someone calls them up and asks for an engineer, they'll send them my way, or whoever. So that's one good way I get work. But Generally, it's a phone call from someone who says, "Hey, I'm this and this. You know, I'm an artist, or I'm in a band, and we've heard some of your stuff, or a friend of ours recommended you." And then from there, it just becomes, it's just like me with anything else. I just ask a million questions. I try and figure out exactly what the scope of their project is, what kind of work they need done, where their music is currently, and, you know, what I can do to try and help them get it to where it needs to be or where they want it to be. And that's usually it. Yeah, I mean, I'll get a phone call, and sometimes it'll be from out of state. Someone, so they'll send me a session online over the internet, and I'll work on it, and they'll pay me through PayPal. And I have clients I've worked with for 3 years that I've never met in person before, and I don't even know their real name because they use, you know, monikers and stuff like that. So it's fascinating. But yeah, usually it's just a phone call and a conversation, and that's how I meet people and get work. Yes. That's almost always the idea. Most of the artists I work with, particularly here in Atlanta, where, you know, kind of our urban music is so popular, the rap and R&B and pop and stuff like that, and dance, they're all exploding pretty much everywhere, but particularly out of Atlanta here. So most of the people I work with, yeah, they're gunning for the big trophy. I mean, I do have some indie guys that I work with who couldn't care less, quite frankly, about like radio play or mass distribution. They're just kind of on the internet doing their thing there. But yeah, the large percentage of people I work with, they're trying for the classical model of music industry success. You know, find a label, get a deal, tour the world, merchandise, although, you know, the full nine. Yeah, occasionally, yeah. Essentially, that's kind of the post-mastering process, and I do a little bit of mastering. I'm terrible at it, so I don't charge people a lot of money for it. But it's I mean, a lot of people are willing to pay for a good mix, but for them, mastering is sort of, you know, you just make it louder and then put it onto a disc, and so they're less inclined to spend money on quality mastering, which is a tragedy because that's how you get obviously the best results. But actually putting a track to CD, yeah, I mean, I've done that occasionally, never for commercial purposes. We'll take that to a professional mastering house or whatever, but you know, people, I'm in a situation a lot of times where I have rappers who will come in and say, all right, we're going to record this one song, and then I'm going to take it tonight to a friend of mine who spins at a club, and we're going to play it in the club and, you know, jam it out there. So in that case, I'll give them a nice high-quality CD. I get these great CDs from Japan called Taiyo Yuden CDs, which, you know, are just like, they have like 100-year media guarantee, so that you can. So anyway, I try and give people these really high-quality CDs with their tracks on it, mastered with CD text. So it'll play and everything, and that's getting less and less common actually. More and more now, people are just bringing in thumb drives, or even better, their phone. You know, they'll just plug in their phone, and I'll put the MP3 on their phone, and they'll go out to their car and plug it into their car and just listen that way. And so the CDs are becoming, or, you know, I'll just email an MP3, and that's it. So yeah, I don't have a ton of to do with putting stuff physically on CDs, but I've definitely done it in the past. Mastering is kind of the final process in mixing or making a song sound like it should. So when someone records in the studio, they take all the individual tracks and component parts and they send it to me to mix. And so I add all the effects and stuff like that on it, and I balance everything out and get all the levels proper and correct. And then we send the final result of that, which is just one stereo track, to a mastering engineer. And what the mastering engineer's job is they're the ones who they bring out they tame the frequencies that are kind of too obnoxious, and they bring out the frequencies that aren't as bright as they should be. They're the ones who make it. They also bring up the volume so it's competitively loud with everything else that's on the radio. But they're mostly the last kind of layer of quality control over a track. They're the ones who sort of take, okay, this is all the work that's been done so far, and they just listen sonically and say, you know, how can I affect this in that last little way that's going to take it over the top? Mastering engineers they can do some amazing stuff. Like if you have a vocal that's too loud, they can turn your vocal down without messing anything else up, or they can, you know, if you have like unruly drums that are hitting too hard and they're not well compressed, the mastering engineer can level that stuff out. And they use mostly, you know, compression, equalizing, and limiting and limiting is just basically a hard compression that, you know, sort of prevents the volume from getting above a certain threshold, which is important in modern pop and, you know, R&B and rap and stuff, because there's the phenomenon known as the loudness war, which is producers in the 40s a long time ago thought that if your song was louder than the last guy's, then you were going to get more attention. People's ears were going to perk up more, and they're kind of right. And so that has been taken to a ridiculous degree, to the point where people are taking mixes and compressing and limiting them so much that it fatigues your ears to listen for too long, and some of it's becoming almost unlistenable. Fortunately, good mastering engineers are the ones who are supposed to mitigate that and make sure that things don't get too out of control. Some mastering engineers will work with stems, what are called stems, which is, kind of summed tracks of different parts. So like the whole drum kit would, if the drum kit is 10 mics and 10 tracks, you would render that drum kit down to like a stereo track, to one stereo track, and that would be the drum stem. Same with guitars and like maybe synthesizers. And some engineers, you can send them 5 or 6 stems, and those stems will encompass, 50, 60 tracks in the session, and they'll work from that. But most mastering engineers traditionally will just work from one stereo track. So I'll take all the work I've done mixing and do what's called bouncing or rendering a track out of my DAW, which in my case is Pro Tools. And so they will just end up with a stereo track of everything I've done. And it'll be at a low enough level where they'll have plenty of what's called headroom, which is kind of, the difference between the highest peak of the song and then kind of the maximum threshold of sound, which is 0 decibels on the full scale system, so 0 dBFS. And basically I just make sure they have enough headroom to do what they need to do. And they take the music to that last kind of place where everything else is. Mastering engineers are a whole different beast than mix engineers. Like, you may look around like a mix engineer studio and they'll have, their speakers might be like $2,000 to $5,000 for a nice pair of studio monitors. A good pair of mastering engineer speakers will be $25,000 to $35,000, and they have these hardware compressors and equalizers that are they do amazing things with sound. I mean, they're tremendous, but their stuff is so expensive. And they have little mouse ears. Like, the mastering engineers are the guys who hear, you can put in a CDR and they'll tell you what frequency the drive is spinning at. Those are the kind of really, really crazy sound guys. But yeah, they use a lot of specialized gear that most mixers don't really use or would have much use for, quite frankly, because their purpose is fairly specific. Yes. Fortunately, as a mixer, I do most of my work in the digital realm, so I'm not working with a lot of hardware per se. So you do get noise introduced whenever you add, plugins or processors. You definitely get noise the more and more you add. But fortunately, with digital technology now, the noise floor is so low. Like, you can really dial in pretty dramatic settings and not have the noise get too out of control. Now, the second a mastering engineer or even a mix engineer who's using hardware starts putting, analog EQs, analog compressors on it, where you have, circuitry being introduced and cables going through metal. So all this stuff brings noise into the equation. So yeah, there's sort of something to be said. A lot of the older school engineers and stuff, they love kind of the hiss of like records, like vinyl, or the hiss of a tape machine on recordings. I'm definitely like a child from the digital era, so I love the cleanliness of CDs and digital medium. Like, I like the fact that you don't hear much noise when you're playing back. But yes, I always do what I can to try and mitigate the noise as much as possible, because it's usually distracting, particularly with intimate material. With a lot of like the rock and the hip hop, the stuff I do that's more heavy, that's kind of like more energetic and has a lot more sound, the noise is less and less important because there's enough masking it. But like right now, for example, I'm mixing a song for a rock band that's like a really intimate, just like an acoustic song that the singer is playing by himself and he's singing a vocal into the mic. I have to be really careful with my processing because the whole song is like 4 tracks. It's like a guitar that's been double tracked, vocals that were cut at the same time as one of the guitar tracks. So if I do too much processing or make too much noise, any one of those tracks is going to stick out. And then the second one of them drops out, you're going to notice that missing noise, and then when it comes back in, you'll hear it be reintroduced. And that kind of stuff is very jarring for listeners. So I always do what I can to mitigate noise. I always tell whoever's mastering my records to be careful about noise as well. I mean, some of the guys I know who are super into vinyl, who still listen to vinyl, they'll say it's, it's mostly, oh, it's the dynamics. You get much stronger. The drums sound like real drums. They're not over compressed and all this stuff. Which is, and one thing I've always tried to do with my digital mixes is I'm always conscious of that. Like, there are things that I like about analog sound. I mean, it does have a certain warmth to it, a certain character. It certainly, and just the nature of vinyl, just the printing process itself, kind of imparts a certain sound to a record. Like, if you listen to a CD cut of a song and the vinyl cut, you can definitely tell a difference. So I've always tried to take some of those kind of the finer points of the analog world and incorporate them into my digital mixing. So I try and make my digital mixes sound as analog as possible. I'll introduce, some tape saturation to it, some warmth plugins, just some stuff to give it a little bit more of that natural dynamic. But I still love the fact that I don't have to hear like record scratching noise when I'm listening back. You find these amazing gems, and all you want to do is listen to them, but the more you listen, it's kind of the more you lose fidelity. And that's another thing that CDs are. I mean, CDs, strangely enough, will actually start doing that over years and years of use, like thousands of uses. But even that, it's very minuscule. I mean, it's digital signal, so it's binary. There's not much room for distortion. But yeah, I'm glad, very thankful for the advent of digital audio. I have this debate all the time with my engineering friends, is that, now we're mixing. There was a time when like the whole debate was raging, like, oh, should you mix differently for MP3, like, or should you mix something differently for iTunes because it's going to go through all these conversions and it's going to be compressed down to a lower file format. And now the conversations are more like, should we be mixing for earbuds, or should we be mixing for phone speakers or laptop speakers, because that's where everyone's listening to music these days. Like, you don't, like, in a room like this is a listening room. Like, it's a room that's just built to listen to music in. And so when I listen, I'm obviously spoiled because I have a room that's been kind of balanced and sort of, laid out with listening in mind. But most people today are listening in their car or in their earbuds when they're walking around, riding a train, like at work, out of their computer speakers. So this changes kind of the nature of what we do, is because there was a time when I would mix records and I wouldn't even it wouldn't occur to me that people would be listening on a playback system that couldn't handle anything below 100 hertz. But when you're dealing with like earbuds from an iPhone or an iPod, those things, you can't really hear much below 100 hertz, 150 hertz. And so you have to really, in your mixing, and some engineers do this and some don't really care, you kind of have to make those adjustments to accommodate that listening environment. I'm always listening for excess noise and kind of like extemporaneous noise, because when you're dealing with, I mean, if I have a lead female vocal and she has a nice high, like beautiful soprano voice, what do I need anything below 300 hertz on her for? Like, I really don't. I mean, all I'm just going to get is like boom. I'm going to get room noise, air conditioning vents, and then and just like plosives, like hard P's and sibilants and stuff like that. So I'm just like, and then if there's other stuff in the mix that needs that frequency space to fill up, I'm not going to really use a lot of her voice below 200 hertz. So I'll filter everything off below that, and then I'll work with her above this frequency range, because same with with the kick drum, I'm not going to necessarily have a lot of like crazy high top end, like anything above like 12 to 13,000 hertz, like it's just airy noise. I don't really need that. It's not going to add anything to the sound of the kick drum, so I filter it off. And the way you can those are the kind of filters where you can sort of make a dramatic cut in frequency, and if you're in the context of the mix and you don't really hear that big of a difference, which is often the case, then you're kind of in the right ballpark. Because if you don't hear something missing, then you're kind of, it's all about just using your ears, obviously, but and kind of identifying where things are clashing and pulling frequencies out from there. But yeah, I love to notch and filter things, and that's how I get a lot of control over what I'm mixing. Always, yeah. And now it's funny. I mean, there was a time when I was worried that earbuds were like the worst it was going to get, and then a lot of my friends, and I just see it with people too now. Now they walk around with their phones and not even with earbuds, and they're just listening to the speaker, which is a mono speaker I mean, so you really can't ask for a worse environment to listen in. You know, it's a stereo signal that's being converted to mono and then pushed out of a little tiny speaker that's going into, you know, the train or wherever you're walking around. So, I mean, in those cases, I find myself adding, you know, I'm adding more like, between like 2,500 and 4,000 hertz is kind of the most prominent frequency range for human speech. So that's where vocals are usually kind of buried or brought out to the front. And so I find myself emphasizing that frequency range more because I'm trying to cut through noise that people are dealing with in their, you know, in the car, in their earbuds, on the bus. I'm thinking about frequencies that are going to have to jump out from someone's listening environment, wherever that may be. And so it's a very strange time to be mixing because we have to keep all this into consideration. And like, for example, I've done some work for like competition cheerleading, you know, like the music that they do, and that stuff all ends up being played in stadiums. And so you would think, okay, well, it's a big stadium setup, you know, surely they'll have good. Most of that stuff's in mono, which people don't actually know, but a lot of stadium speakers, since the array is so spread around the kind of the arena, it's impossible to get a really good stereo profile from anywhere. So they want it to sound as consistent as possible from everywhere. So you do that by taking a bunch of mono speakers and just making them an array across the whole. So you end up with, you know, this massive sound system pumping out a mono track, which is unusual because everything's in stereo now pretty much, aside from like AM radio. Most people are listening in stereo, but so nowadays, you know, when I'm mixing, I'm thinking of, okay, how's this going to sound in earbuds? How's this going to sound in mono? How's this going to sound on a laptop? How's it going to sound in a car? Like, you know, all these different. My job as an engineer, essentially as a mix engineer, is to get a song sounding as good as possible in as many different listening environments as possible. And headphones, I mean, earbuds are kind of a travesty in my opinion. I don't like the way I don't like anything being that close to my ears first off while I'm listening to music, and most people have them way too loud. But headphones, I mean, a good pair of headphones is still one of the best ways to listen to music if you have a good quality pair. And the reason for that is because it takes the room out of the equation. You know, I mean, whenever most people are listening, even if you go to a wealthy guy's house and he has some nice fancy $100,000 studios, like, you know, audio set up in his home theater, it still may sound terrible because the guy hasn't thought about, oh, like the room that I'm in affects how you hear things. The listening environment is so important. And so headphones take that out of the equation completely. So if you have a quality enough pair of headphones, I would argue it's still one of the best places to listen to music these days. Now the Beats headphones that everyone has these days, they're pretty good. I mean, they sound all right. In my opinion, they hype the low end a little bit too much. They're a little heavy on the bottom, so I wouldn't use them for anything that requires accuracy. Like I wouldn't mix through them because they do things to the sound that I don't like the sound of. But I'll take people listening to Beats over earbuds any day of the week. It's called Melodyne. Melodyne, I believe it's spelled. It's like auto-tune. It's kind of like, I call it auto-tune on steroids. Because auto-tune, you can sort of plug into a track, and then you get kind of an instant, quick sort of tuning effect. It'll quickly take your vocals and tune them. Melodyne requires much more, you know, you have to actually go in and tune stuff manually, but the amount of stuff you can do with it is ridiculous. It's got this function on it they call it DNA. It stands for direct note access. And you can essentially take, like if you're taking a guitar, you can strum a guitar chord and run it through Melodyne, and it will access all of the notes within the chord, and you can actually tune notes inside a chord and maintain the integrity of the chord. It's absolutely incredible technology. I have no idea how they do it. Incidentally, a lot of the major plug-in manufacturers are German. I don't know why, but they just do. They have engineering there that the likes of which I guess is perfect for sound manipulation. But yeah, it's very cool stuff. So yeah, you can take a note and tune it to whatever your hearts are. I always tell my mom, I'm like, Mom, if you can come in here and sing a few words, and I can make you sound like Barbra Streisand. You know, like it's that's the nature of a lot of this digital recording stuff. You know, it's shocking what you can do. Auto-tune uses what I can only imagine is a very complex algorithm, and it will actually allow you to tune anything you put it on, but it's mostly used on vocals. And what you can do is you can set the threshold at which it will begin tuning. So like a longer threshold is what they call relaxed. And so that basically says, okay, listen for a note and then wait a given number of milliseconds before you begin the tuning. So that's better for more like operatic, if you need to tune one or two notes and you don't want to screw up the performance, you leave it to a really kind of loose setting so it only tunes when it's absolutely necessary. Or you can do the converse of that, which is kind of, was popularized by that Cher song, Believe, and that's the classic like T-Pain kind of auto-tune effect that people are so familiar with and kind of not happy with right now too. It seems to be like, that's kind of like distortion, where it's like the first time distorted guitars came out, you heard it in every song imaginable. That's kind of where auto-tune is right now. Like, it's just a new effect that people discovered, so they use it everywhere. But yes, and so that can tune your vocal very quickly to the point where you get that stair-stepping kind of digital, artifact that people are using so much in popular music. And Melodyne has a similar algorithm, but you have to manipulate the notes yourself and kind of put them where you want them to be. And you can get those same dramatic effects that you can with auto-tune. It's just a bit more work. So generally my workflow is I'll use auto-tune if I need to tune a vocal. If it's not that bad and it can just be solved with a quick little work, then I'll put auto-tune on it. Sometimes though, I get vocal tracks, man, like, it's like, did you even know what you were singing? Like, some people don't even know the note they're going for, and they just open their mouths and sing. So that's when you got to get surgical and break out Melodyne. And Melodyne, I've taken some of the worst performances I've ever heard, and you can turn them into gold. You can actually create harmonies with it as well, which is amazing. You can copy a vocal track and change the notes to wherever you want them to go, and it copies the track with different pitches. So I've taken a single vocal part and created 12-part choral harmonies out of it with just Melodyne, without no actual extra recording. It's incredible. So now you can have live auto-tune that tunes your voice on the fly in an arena, like through an actual mic live. So now even that whole thing, now it's like, I can at least go see them live and see how they perform live. Now even that is an outmoded concept because they're backtracking a lot of stuff. Then the lip syncing you mentioned, very common in pop music. I love it when people, they see someone like Britney Spears who's doing like essentially like an aerobic workout on stage dancing, and it's like you never hear her take a breath, like you didn't know, and they're gobsmacked when they find out that she was lip syncing, and it's just like, you can't look at that and tell that it's clearly not. There's none of the normal human reactions to stress are being exhibited by her at the moment. You would think that would be enough to. I think that's the thing that people expect these artists to be kind of superhuman, and the technology now is making them seem more superhuman than they are. It's always been that way, but now I think more so than ever. Vocal comping, where we'll record 20, 30 takes of a vocal line, and then they'll go through every single word, and they'll take the best, half of this word from this take, and the other best half of this word from this take, and then they'll combine them together. And I've seen stuff where people are taking syllables of words and moving them around to, the S on that just didn't feel that right. Can we get this S over here and put it over here? To the point where it's crazy. And this software, stuff like Melodyne and Auto-Tune and Pro Tools generally, we need it to be able to make those kind of really minute adjustments to stuff like that. I don't like to work like that personally. I'm much more of like I'm 29 now, which in the modern music industry makes me kind of an elder statesman, because everyone's so young. So I have an older school approach where I actually want vocalists and performers to perform and to be able to do their job well. It doesn't seem like it would be asking much, but it is sometimes. So I like to make people sing through all of their material, and we'll go through and punch in little things that need it, but generally I'm not going to sit there for 3 hours and do a vocal comp where I take 40 vocals and I'm just not going to do it. I want a singer who can actually sing and do what they're supposed to do the first time, and who knows their material. And and coming from the world of classical music, this must all sound just ridiculous to you, because people play their instrument. It's all about the musician. If not for the musician, then what else have you? And there's not much manipulation that we can do to classical in this software, and it's like for good reason. Like, there shouldn't be. The whole point is to get that organic sound of a room full of musicians playing together and doing that delicate dance. But It's interesting. I mean, it's like every year the tools that I use to do my job get better and better, and my job gets easier and easier. And the unfortunate byproduct of that is that a lot of artists now, they're slacking more and they're being more lax in their own work because they know the capabilities that we have. They're like, oh, I don't have to hit this note perfectly because Anthony can tune it for me. Or even playing a bass, like, oh, that was a sour note, but I hit it pretty good a few measures later, so we can just take that one and bring it in and put it over here, which I do every day, stuff like that all the time, So to a certain extent, I kind of feel it's almost like I'm taking some of the music out of musicianship, by using all this stuff. But again, this is what we do. Like, it's just, I'm here to manipulate sound, and these are the tools for my trade. I was like, at Full Sail, I had some instructors who would tell me, look, we've been tuning vocals since the late 70s, early 80s, but we never used auto-tune. They would do this. They told me these amazing stories of, they would be recording a vocal, and the vocal would be playing back through a tape machine. And so they would take the tape machine that the vocal was on, and route it to another tape machine where they had just a fresh track. And when they were going through the vocal, a crafty engineer, during a vocal that may have been a little bit sharp or a little bit flat, they would actually pinch the tape as it was going through the playhead, and they would slow down the tape ever so slightly, or they would find a way to speed it up, and then they would record that output onto a new track on a different tape machine. And then what you had was kind of a tuned vocal. I mean, you had a vocal that you could ever so slightly adjust to get that pitch just. So I mean, there have been crafty engineers doing crafty things with crafty musicians for as long as we've been recording. But yes, I mean, in the Beatles era, of course, you had a 4-track machine. If you were lucky, and you recorded everything, all 4 tracks, you dumped it to the first track, then you recorded 3 more, dumped it to the second track. I mean, it was, the amount of work they had to do to make those songs is unimaginable to most people now. And then just editing on tape. Like, when I edit something now, if I'm in Pro Tools right now, I can click on something and hit a button, and then I've made an edit, and I can undo that edit very easily and bring back what I had before. On tape, you were sitting there on a lathe, you had a razor and a magnifying glass on, and you had Led Zeppelin's master tape on, and if you made a mistake and cut the wrong place, well, then you've just screwed up Led Zeppelin's master tape. And this was during a time when, I mean, to get into a studio to record music, you had to basically, it was the amount of money that a car would cost now. I mean, you would have to pay 3 days of studio time in 1970 would cost you like 20 grand. I mean, this was no joke back in the day. So yeah, being an engineer in those times was a whole different ball game. But again, it's just about getting the best sound you possibly can with the tools that you have at your disposal. A lot of young engineers in the 70s, 80s who probably could have had a good career, had it cut short quickly when they made a hasty editing mistake on someone's roll of tape, and that's why I'm thankful for. I do kind of occasionally wax nostalgic about the days of yore in engineering and music, but man, I don't miss that for anything. I had a little bit of training on tape at Full Sail because I mean I was in there in 2004, so it's not like it was old. I mean, we were using Pro Tools. Everything was digital at that point, but there are still some people who you go into their studio and they got that that O2R, they got those old tape machines and they're primed and ready to go. And then tape, talk about limited, degeneration as it's playing, even worse than vinyl. I mean, you have bleed through everything. Yeah, you got to have your time code on track 24. All of this stuff that you had to do, you get that bleed, and then yeah, as you're playing tape, I mean, that's the thing. Mixing now, I mean, I can take 3 months to mix one song, which I don't, but I could, and it would all be preserved exactly as I recorded it originally. Nothing degrades. On tape, I mean, if you play that tape 50, 60, 80, 100 times, eventually it starts losing fidelity. And so if you're mixing, you can't, rewind and stop and play, and you can't spend weeks mixing a single record on tape. Like, you have to get that thing out and done because it's only there for a limited amount of time. When I learned about all this at Full Sail, I was like, you old guys are out of your minds. Like, I don't know how you did all this. The DAT tape must have been like the most beautiful thing ever, because it's just like, it combines the best of both worlds. But yeah, I couldn't imagine. You got to calibrate the tape machines, you got to clean the playheads, the repro head. Like, it's it's a whole different world, you know. That's when engineer. I mean, those were the days when when you walked into a studio and said, "I want to be an engineer," and they would hand you like a soldering iron and be like, "Okay, make me a compressor." Like make, you know, those were the days of like what, you know, engineering really was.